So let's talk about this conspiracy of the 16th Amendment. That's our lesson today. Now, this is the problem. This right here, like, hey, are you anti-government? I mean, I just can't figure this out. You tell your fellow friend or family or neighbor, somebody at the supermarket, do you know what happened? And look at what happened in 1913. This whole thing. I'm like, huh, are you kidding me? That's the government. That's my government. I wear the red, white, and blue. I mean, I sing the national anthem at songs. I put my hand over my heart. I pledge to this country. And you, sir, you need to get with your act here. You see, what they're not factoring in the equation is these folks. Okay. These folks are controlling those folks. And again, timing can't be better for this message. We have a debt ceiling we're debating about. And look at the guys on the right. That's what they're debating on. We're going to pay those bankers to get some more money. We need some more cash. Let's go to those private folks. You see, if you don't see this, it is impossible. You will not ever understand this. So, again, understanding this is they print it on their own bills. Those folks, they print the money, not our government. Those don't come from the government, those bills. Understand that. It comes from the private folks, the private ones. So, look, Henry Ford says this is in his own words. He's the maker of the Ford automobile, the first automobile. He tells us this in 1921, 8 years after they finally cemented this scheme. Henry Ford says it is well enough that the people of this nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. That was 8 years after it happened, and they had no idea. Henry Ford was one of the insiders. He knew, and he told that. Now, that was 1921. Remember this quote. I'm going to lay a lot of groundwork, and then we're going to lay that quote and see what Henry Ford knew. Okay, when you understand this chronologically, like watching a movie, who understands a movie if you don't fully understand the beginning scenes and how it develops? So we're going to go over that now, the development on a historical timeline. Now, yesterday, the first few events we covered in detail. We're just doing a quick recap. Revolutionary War, the cry was taxation without representation. We covered this yesterday. Our very country was united. 13 colonies united to form what? A country called the United States. We are 50 different nations. If you don't believe so, go look at your map and look at the borders. Congratulations, you're in the Republic of California. You're in the Republic of North Carolina. This formed different jurisdictions. Then the Articles of Confederation, again, we covered this in detail yesterday. Go back to yesterday. This was our first constitution. It gave those different jurisdictions. You guys have all the sovereign power. You live in North Carolina, you guys deal with yourselves. You tax yourselves. Hey, Virginia, you don't need to pay attention to North Carolina. You do it yourselves, okay? They established the sovereignty of each one of those jurisdictions. Then we roll a few years later, and it was cemented. It's called the Bill of Rights, the amendments. You guys know the Second Amendment, right? Do we even need to quote it? The right to bear arms. How about the right to remain silent? The Fifth Amendment. I plead the Fifth. This here is your rights against a national government doing something against you. That's what the law is. I always thought, the law is something you're doing to be a lawbreaker, right? No, now that's not the Constitution. That's the law that protects you. All you have to do is take your rights back, and right there in the Bill of Rights, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, in that Constitution revised, it states that they can't tax you directly. They being that different jurisdiction called this one right here. A year later, they mapped out their own territory where they could trick the folks and pass a law that applies only to that 10 square mile area and trick you into signing up for Washington, D.C., and they got you. By contract, you're telling us you live in our jurisdiction. And yet the Bill of Rights, which I just covered in that Constitution, okay, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4 says they can't do it directly. My daughter, again, has never filed a tax return. She's never going to get a bill directly. They gots to. April 15th, gots to get her in there and trick her. Go ahead and sign. Boo, scary. Oh no, you might go to jail. Sign. That's how they get you, okay, to in their jurisdiction. And they laid this out in historical order to then try to trick everybody. Now, watch how this plays out. Now we're in 1790. The national government was just a meeting spot before 1790. It was just it's called the Continental Congress. They met in 9 different cities for 16 years, and then they called a home. And that's fine. It's a meeting spot. We agree to that. That's a whole different thing because when it's your own area that you own, they then owned that and they moved into that in the year 1800. This here, again, speaking of the Continental Congress, they had convened in 9 different cities between 1774 and 1800, and then they moved into their own little tiny jurisdiction, their box, 10 square mile area. So it's all about the J word. If you don't understand jurisdiction, this is going to be very hard to understand how this works because when they carved that out, they then became the lawmakers that could pass laws that only apply to their 10 square mile area or anybody that works for it or does business with it. In it called the United States. They call the United States that 10 square mile area. We're going to cover this tomorrow of how they deceive us with language. So therefore, you're not part of their jurisdiction, and then you clearly wouldn't know this because of the way that we define it and the way they define it. However, when they pass laws, 85% of them is estimated only applies to that jurisdiction. Again, this is the United States. We have all of our own jurisdictions, 50 of them, and this was a childhood thing that I could always like, I don't understand, teacher, why is Washington D.C. not one of the 50 states? For this reason, trickery, jurisdiction. So again, you must understand these things. You have to understand how the banking world put us into deep debt that we're scratching our heads right now. We're shut down. We don't know. Do we need to go get some more money from those private folks? They have driven us into deep debt. If you don't see the connection of the bankers, you won't understand this conspiracy. It's just they put it in the billboards. This says 20 trillion. This is about 15 years ago. It's like 37 trillion is I think what they're advertising these days. So the national debt explained is the first person that we need to address is this guy Alexander Hamilton. He's so close. He's way closer to you than you can think. He might even be in your pocket right now. Alexander Hamilton. And so we're calling this third time as a charm because they honor this guy as one of their heroes because he not only was the architect of Washington, D.C., and forming their own jurisdiction and coming up with that. He was the main proponent of that, but he also did something else. He started what's called the first bank of the United States. It was the first attempt at what is a central bank. You may not understand that. We'll explain that in a second, okay? But this charter ended after 20 years. They knew what was up. They knew it. And so they being the Patriots, okay, and it ended after 20 years. Thomas Jefferson, the third president at the time, 20 years later ended it. Then they came back in 1816 and they didn't even change the name. They tried the second bank of the United States. Again, they knew the bankers were at the heart of this, trying to form a central bank. The charter ended after 20 years. And Andrew Jackson, the president at that time, ended it because he knew what they were up to. Now is the third time, and they're not dumb enough to say the third bank of the United States. In 1913, they called it something else, something fancy, the Federal Reserve. It was their third attempt that was successful finally through the confusion, and now nobody's going to end that because of the confusion. So we're going to get back to Alexander Hamilton. He becomes important to see how this conspiracy works and how close he is. But for right now, let's talk about a central bank and what that is. You see, banking, the way they want you to believe, and most people believe it, I think, when they're bank shopping. Today I got an email about an issue at a local little tiny bank. So they just close to people's heart. I love it when I have that hometown bank. I just love those guys over there. Hey, that's great. You like them? They're friendly. They know you by name, kind of like Cheers. They're gonna slide you a beer and have a good conversation with you. I like those guys. Okay, it doesn't matter where you go. It could say Wells Fargo, Bank of America, be the local bank of Rapid City, South Dakota. Wow, it's got our name on it. Doesn't matter. The way though they want you to think is you take your money in and they're going to guard it for me. The next day I'm going to come back and it's there. I can see it. It's just sitting there. They're safeguarding it. Well, I'll tell you what, try bringing like $100,000 in, come back the next day and ask for $100,000 out. They don't have it. It's gone, not there. Okay, that's not how it works. Okay, that's the way they want you to think it works. A central bank has one bank, one, and all banks go through that bank for all policies and all issues, all monetary issues. They're all in the same sheet of music. It's called the SWIFT code. They're all connected by the SWIFT network through the Federal Reserve. And if you want to doubt that, go to any bank, ask for some money and look at it. It's going to say the Federal Reserve note on every dollar bill that you have. Okay. It's right there. They're a central bank, meaning they control everything. And that's what the early founders were against. They said, this can't happen. We're not going to allow it. You see, there was no confusion regarding the forming of the first two central banks, none whatsoever. This was the quote from Thomas Jefferson. This is what he says about the first Bank of the United States and Alexander Hamilton's effort. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a moneyed aristocracy that has set the government at defiance. The issuing power of money should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. This was such a fierce rivalry between Jefferson, who ended Alexander Hamilton effort of a central bank, that his vice president, Aaron Burr, ended Alexander Hamilton's life. So go figure what was going on behind the scenes of the tension of that. The second Bank of the United States, no confusion whatsoever. Look at these plain words by Andrew Jackson. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to root you out by the eternal God. I will root you out. Talking to the bankers, and he put estoppel on that second bank effort. So laying out this history, we're going to put in and lay in this history so you can see how much effort they put in to go ahead and capture money from you, because you're at the end of this story. You happen to live on the end of this story. So they laid the foundations. Watch them lay the foundations after 1790. The attempts at a federal income tax. Okay, first, they also, through law, through an unconstitutional law, that they actually got the states to agree to it, which no longer becomes unconstitutional because the states agreed to this tax. They used the Civil War in Abraham Lincoln's day to say, yep, we're going to donate to you guys. Okay. The states agreed to that and they started paying a tax to Washington, D.C. That ended. That became unconstitutional in 1869. And the reason for it is the states stopped agreeing to it because the war ended. They're thinking, wait, the war ended. We're not going to keep paying you taxes. You see the Constitution there I have there in 1789? It says you can't tax us directly. We're opting out. States opted out. Becomes unconstitutional. Then they tried again. It was called the Wilson-Gorman tax in 1894. The Pollock decision ended that. Supreme Court decision the next year. That became unconstitutional 1 year later. And so building upon this, there was not a chance, and they knew this. This is where the secret meeting comes in, okay? They knew they weren't going to be able to get away with it. They tried different ways to get the people's money. They tried the central banks. That was stopped. They tried their laws from Washington, D.C., and that was stopped. Okay, so President Taft came out and admitted to it. He just said, you know what? We can't tax you directly. We're going to tax ourselves. That was the plan, to go ahead and tell this to people. And they plotted this out in the same year. That secret meeting happened in Jekyll Island, Georgia. Yes, the secret meeting. And these are the folks in that meeting. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg. They were the banking giants in that day. They competed against each other in trying to war for the power of money in society. They knew they couldn't beat each other out because they were the giants against each other. So they joined them. They joined together. You can't beat them? Well, join them. They all came together in a secret meeting to say, how can we do this? We tried the taxes. We tried to do Washington, D.C. thing. We tried our central banks. Let's do this. Okay. Senator Aldrich was in the upper right. He was part of that. Read the book, A Creature from Jekyll Island, so you understand this meeting. President Wilson there is in the upper right as well. And in the meeting, they said, look, pass a law. We don't care what law it is because we're going to trick people to believe they owe it. They owe that. They owe that tax to that law. And here you are at the end of the movie going, that's too good to be true. I just owe that tax. We all do. No, this is their plan. They want to make you believe that. And they did that beginning in 1909. That was the efforts they put forward. So the plan was to hijack our currency. And they did that. And by the way, again, we're shut down. We got no money. What about that debt ceiling? Let's go knock on their door and say, we need more money. Okay, we need more cash to keep this government going. That was their plan. They've been very successful, don't you think? We're shut down, and they got some rug pull coming soon. Don't let that trick you when the banks all shut down and then there's a line, I don't know, 10 miles long, and they go, what happened? What happened? Well, a banking crisis. You see this whole shutdown thing, and now the banks are out. The poor banks. Gosh, we feel sorry for them. And by the way, I know you got $1 million in the bank. You can only get $100 a day. That's it. And by the way, you got to stand in this line for 10 miles. Okay. That's them. That's what they've done. And we're on this time continuum. Okay. That's the plan. That's what they did. And they accomplished it. It's about all about that 10 square mile area. In other words, here's what they're saying. Here's what they did. This is the money, what it looked like in the 1800s. It said United States on it right there. It was our bills, the greenbacks. And then now it says past 1913, United States. And now it says this Federal Reserve note. That's them. A note means a debt. These are actually negative value, these dollar bills. That's why we're shut down. Do we need to go get some of those more of those Federal Reserve notes? That's what they call them right there. So now we go back to our timeline and we understand these events. Let's lay them out at one at a time. 1790, the same year Alexander Hamilton, proponent was the major proponent of Washington, D.C. He also simultaneously was forming the first bank of the United States. That failed after 20 years. 1811, the second bank failed after 20 years. 1861, they tried to get some money. It worked for a little while, and the states agreed to it. The war ended, and then that ended after 8 years, that tax. The Wilson-Gorman tax, they tried that, put it on some of the elite. It was a minor tax to get their foot in the door. That ended in a year. 1909, we got to do something different, guys. We got a good plan, and it worked. It worked well. The plan started, and the Federal Reserve, and I'm sorry, the federal income tax, being the 16th Amendment, was presented before Congress. And in Taft's own words, he clearly states it. We know we can't tax them directly, them being the states. Why don't we do this? Why don't we tax ourselves? That's why it's called a federal income tax. It's a tax on the federal government. That clearly in their own language. Even more important than the letter of the law is the intent of the law. It's right there in 1909. It's called the Congressional Record. We have that. We can show it to you. He says it in those words when they presented the bill. It was passed 4 years later after going through 535 individuals that clearly 435 House of Representatives, 100 state senators passed because they clearly knew the spelling out of that. Look at these dates. They knew that they weren't going to be able to tax themselves, and they're like they I could imagine asking them. They're all dead, obviously, but could you imagine going back? Hey, what were you thinking when you passed that income tax? Right? Wait a second, that's not what we passed. We wouldn't then they wouldn't have received one vote, not one, because they all knew you can't do that. You're not going to tax my people. I represent Georgia. I represent Alabama. I represent Utah. You're not taxing our people over here. They can't do it. Okay. So that's how they did it. That's how it was passed. And boom, it still exists today that way. By the way, that's the law. So in 1913, though, the Federal Reserve Act came. And then they just swindled our money from us. They hijacked us. Okay. They print our money. And this is a 1-2 step of a legislative agenda to trick us, to have us donate to them. We are donating to the central bankers by paying that tax. That's as plain and simple. So now, as we look at this, do you understand this quote now? You think Henry Ford knew some things that the regular folk doesn't? The maker of the automobile. It is well enough that the people of this nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning. You're looking at history that he knew. That was 8 years after the hijacking of their currency. So there is an event that I missed. I missed an event, 1912, right here. I missed an event. Okay. All events can be tracked to this, by the way. World War One, World War Two, of course, the Great Depression, for sure, the Great Depression, right? They just pulled the rug like they can do at any time with our economy. The Spanish flu of 1918, COVID, all that stuff, 9/11, everything goes back to these fingerprints. They print everything, they own everything, they write the script. Don't think they don't. They own everything. They can buy everything, okay? Because they print everything. So there's an event that I missed in 1912. I'll get to that in a minute. Again, the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment work harmoniously together. It was a 1-2 legislative agenda. There was no coincidence they were passed 10 months apart in the same year. Here was the agenda. First, pass a law that authorizes a tax. We don't care what it is. We don't care who it applies to. Just get a law passed, Senator Aldrich. Let's get something in motion, okay? They did that in February of 1913. Then we're going to sell to the government. Hey, guys, how about this, Congressman? We're going to give you so much money you can just access. Just let us give you credit. We'll give you credit. They write a check on a blank account. That's how crazy this is. Have you ever tried to write a check yourself on a blank account? Try that. Try a bank account that's closed. Write a check for $100. You'll go to jail because you intended to defraud somebody by writing a blank check. That's what they do. And right now we're debating on the debt ceiling. Do we need to go over to those guys so they can write us a blank check on an account that doesn't exist just so they can wave a magic wand and poof, there's some credit. We can keep our government rolling. We can get some people hired again. That's the two-step agenda, okay? The unlimited credit. Then hand the currency to the bankers, which they did. And we are going to drive America into such deep debt that Americans will believe they owe it. Now just laugh when you hear it today. Yeah, the debt ceiling. We got to do something about that national debt. That's the deception. When you hear that, go, wow, that's a liar. And look, I know we love Trump, okay? Even if he says it, he's lying because he knows what that is. That's imaginary. We don't owe that debt. That's an economic phenomena that they created from this mess, this matrix that they formed, okay? So we don't owe it, but they got Americans to think that we do, you see? Because then they'll agree to pay a tax that they don't owe. Okay, and that's how this works, the 16th Amendment. And now that number is well over apparently 37 trillion now. Okay, back to our hero of the story. Well, not quite their hero of the story, Alexander Hamilton. You see, football has a Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Baseball has a Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, Ohio, the best of the best. Well, they have a Hall of Fame as well, the central bankers. Okay. In honor of that traitor, he gets his spot on the $10 bill. Now, I want you to think, is this really a conspiracy? And hopefully, maybe somebody's struggling. Maybe they're right on the borderline. Hey, sir, hey, man, you make a little bit of sense here. Man, that's crazy. How do they do that, right? I'm sure that's going, well, let's just look and see if it's true. Let's see if they give it to you in plain sight. Here's all the dollar bills. Real patriots. George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses Grant. You got Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, right? They're mocking us and them because look at the other fellow circled in red. That's Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill. Do you see how in red the arrows are pointing the other way for him, the arrow? In blue, they're facing the U.S. Treasury. That's a seal meaning our government, the U.S. Treasury. On the left is the Federal Reserve. It's their banking matrix. And that's what Alexander Hamilton is facing. Here it is. You see this? Circled in red again, Federal Reserve note. He's circled right here, encircled here, is the Federal Reserve System. He's facing that. Now, do you see the words "we the people" in red? I want to go back to the last picture. Take a look at this again. "We the people" is not printed on any other one of those bills in red on the right. Only the $10 bill. And why would they do that? What does it mean when somebody's back is faced something? Isn't that traitor? Is that what that means? Or coming against? They put "we the people" in our face and they mock us on these bills. And he's facing the other way for that very reason. Do you think that this is a conspiracy? Just some happenstance? Just some people out of control? Hey, a guy named Bob. Bob, we need some money. Just print something, whatever. Just put some patriots on there. Put anybody. Put, you know, put Henry Ford on there. Put anybody on these bills. It doesn't matter. Put anybody's face. Do whatever you want. You think that's just a coincidence? Hamilton's on there. First Bank of the United States. So now we're back to this event. Okay. Now, if that doesn't add up to be a conspiracy, look at this one. What happened in 1912? A big event. 1912. One of a staple that we still have movies about today. What was this?
Thinking of the Titanic.
Yeah, Ben, I knew you'd say it. I knew you'd say it. The Titanic sank. Is that just happenstance? Well, that sounds like conspiracy, right? Okay, let's take a deeper look at this. Who died on that ship? Well, there were three very wealthy people, the most wealthy people alive then. This guy named Guggenheim, Isa Strauss, and Jacob Astor. They were on that first maiden journey. JP Morgan was also on that, and he stepped off because he owned the ship. He was the main financier of the Titanic. He invited all these wealthy folks on this maiden journey. Okay. He stepped off 10 minutes before, got a little bit of cough in him. Okay. Stepped off the boat. He knew what was coming. They went down on the ship. They were the main proponents of the Federal Reserve, these three folks, and they could have stopped it with their money power. They knew who the bankers were. They weren't having it. They were not going to allow that to pass. The time and date of this, you think it's coincidence? It sank at 2:20 a.m. Are you ready? On April 15th, 1912. Did you ever wonder why April 15th, tax day, the day that you have on your calendar? What they have done is they have memorialized the very date that set them free to go ahead and take our money supply and tax you. So they put April 15th as the date of the sinking Titanic. You're going to faithfully come in every day, every April 15th, and get your taxes signed on the sinking of the Titanic that allowed them to capture your money. Isn't that interesting? That's just conspiracy, though, right? April 15th is just a complete coincidence. So here's why this is so significant. If the Federal Reserve doesn't pass, okay, there is no national debt. Doesn't exist. Our government's not shut down right now. We're not shut down. Debating on a debt ceiling. And if there is no national debt, there is nobody paying a tax. Nobody pays the tax because it doesn't apply to them, and nobody's going to believe they owe the tax because they began with the agenda: national debt, national debt. Those early folks in 1914, 1915 opened up their newspaper that was controlled by the Rothschilds. Oh my gosh, there's a national debt. I better start paying my taxes, pay down that national debt. That's how they started, and that's what they're still beating that drumbeat today. Okay, so this is how we provide you support, guys. Come back tomorrow. We'll explain more of the support we provide you, more of the documentation to get you easily protected and out of the system. We're here every day, 6 days a week to answer your questions. We're going to get into questions right now. There's training on Monday nights at 4 p.m. to go over your paperwork. If you decide to start paperwork with us, we help you the whole way. You have access to our community center. There's an affiliate link to share with friends and family. You make $500 just by sharing the good news and the help that we'll provide them with lifetime support. The revocation of election documentation that we help you with, that simply is an affidavit. You let them know you're not a taxpayer. You're breaking the contract. You first signed up at a young age. You agreed you lived in Washington, D.C. It's their words. It's their codes. We're not making this up. This is how they tell you to exit the system, by giving them a revocation of election. Come back tomorrow. We'll explain that more. Then the setup of your own unincorporated association to protect all your assets and move you out of all harm's way. Receive no money to your social security number. It has an exempt EIN with the IRS. It's a legal entity registration with the Secretary of State of California. You can live anywhere, doesn't matter. It comes with bylaws and constitution. You need that to get your banking account set up. It's great for estate planning. What does the unincorporated association do for you? It allows you to move all assets out of that tracking number. The date that I left off on the time continuum was 1935. That's a Social Security Act. They removed gold from backing the dollar to back it with every baby born. You were born into the system. Your Social Security number backs the dollar bill, and they kind of trap us in not understanding that we don't want to have income, quote unquote income, because then we can qualify for all kinds of benefits. You're the creditor, I'm the creditor in society. Go ahead and qualify for benefits. It protects all your assets from liens, judgments, collections, creditors, any tax issues. It has no contractual relationship with the IRS. That means no federal income tax, no state income tax. That means no filings required, and it is the ultimate estate planning tool. It is far better than a trust. I've gone over my time limit today. We're going to go into question and answer now. Welcome to our community. Thanks for joining us today. See who's up first on the question.